Welcome to Theology for the People. My name is Nick Cady, and the purpose of this podcast is to bring theological discussions to you in a way that's understandable, relatable, and interesting. I believe that all of us are engaged in theological discussions and thinking, and I want to help us to do it biblically and well, and also introduce you to some topics that are theological in nature. And so on this episode, I'm joined by my friend, Stephen Pomeroy. Stephen is a pastor at Whitefields Community Church in Longmont, Colorado, which is also where I pastor. And Stephen's been on staff with us now, coming up close to 2 years. In addition to being a pastor on staff at Whitefields Church, Stephen has a hobby and an interest in Viking legacy and lore. In fact, Stephen started a podcast called Viking Legacy and Lore. And on this episode, what we talk about is the conversion of the Vikings. We talk about the monomyth, the concept that within every culture, there are similarities in the stories that they tell. And why is that? Well, from a Christian perspective, we believe that the truth of God's word and the true story of the world is written onto our hearts, and there's something that resonates with every human being. We talk about the origin of polytheism, monotheism, and these sorts of things from a secular perspective, but also from a Christian perspective. We talk about origin myths that came out of the Viking and Scandinavian areas and how those actually have some similarities with the Bible. And we take really a missionary approach to understanding this culture, their history, and people who are engaged with it today. It's a really fascinating discussion. I hope you'll get a lot out of it. So with no further ado, here is my conversation with Pastor Stephen Pomeroy. Hey, welcome to Theology for the People. My name is Nick Cady, and I'm joined by Pastor Stephen Pomeroy. How you doing?
Doing
Pastor?
fantastic.
Doing fantastic. You excited to be here?
This is amazing.
This
What
is your
an
second.
opportunity.
This is your second time on Theology for the People.
Yes, and the subject matter could not be more different.
It's pretty different,
Yeah.
but pretty interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so there have been some interesting developments that have taken place since the last time you were on the show. We're here to talk today about the conversion of the Vikings, and you're a bit of a Viking expert. Tell us a little bit about the story of how you became a Viking expert.
Yep. So, Vikings, I think a lot of people have an interest in Vikings, or like this time.
I'm not one of them.
No, not at all.
I've
Zero.
zero interest, never been interested, but I'm here for you.
It would appear. There are television series on
Right.
multiple
Some
streaming
people are
platforms
interested.
that would suggest that there are quite a few people that are somewhat interested in the topic. But it wasn't until my aunt did a genealogy, and you look back at the history, and there's always been some stories surrounding our last name, Pomeroy, where it came from. I always knew it was part of the French Norman, which just meant that it's the Northmen, the Vikings from Scandinavia, from Norway, that settled in.
Wait, are you telling me Norman means North man?
Yeah.
I did not know that. I've been to Normandy.
Really?
I'm going
Yeah.
to try and pronounce it. You ready?
Okay.
Rouen,
Okay.
the capital of Normandy.
Yeah.
And it was awesome. That's where Jeanne d'Arc was burned at the stake.
Okay. That's where, the Norwegians, they came down and they were giving fits to the French and the Franks at the time. And they said, you know what, just take this land, leave us alone. And there's a whole bunch of things you can get into with the history of that.
The Germans still call them Franks.
Yeah.
Frankreich.
There you go. So an aunt did a genealogy and kind of like, okay, so I looked through that and it's like, all right, it's interesting. Wow, that goes way back, all the way back to Norway. It's like, man, I'm not sure every genealogy is like that. But then come to find out, as you start digging, and the reason why it goes back that far is because there's some links to some very famous historical figures that makes that genealogy go back. Because if you're just a regular guy, your genealogy is going to be very limited. But if you're connected to a king or a ruler, now all of a sudden those genealogies were preserved much longer. So we could go all the way back to Rolf of Norway and then see that transition where they came down, settled, and then here we are in Longmont, Colorado.
All right. So you were interested in the Vikings.
Yep.
And then you started a new hobby.
Yeah, the hobby of doing a podcast.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it was funny how I found out. Here's how I found out. Okay.
Oh boy.
Okay. I was Good Friday,
Yep.
and my cousin, who goes to church here, he walked up to me and he said, "Hey, I saw Steven's video online." Now, that week, you and I had done a sermon extra video for our church. And I thought, yeah, I agree. I know he was on, I was on the video with him. And then he says to me, "I'm not sure if I believe him." And I'm like, "About what? About the Bible?" Because that's what we had been talking about. And he goes, "No, about the Vikings." And I'm like, I mean, he could have said, I don't know, that you're like an expert in, I don't know, asphalt creation or something like, you know what I'm saying? It was like the last thing I would have expected. And I'm like, nah, what are you talking about? So he pulls up his phone, shows me his video on TikTok, and there's this guy who looks like you. And I told him, I said, "I don't think that's him. I think that's a different guy." And he's like, "No, that's him." So I said, "Let me hear his voice." I was like, "Oh my, that is him." So that evening, I kind of tried to draw it out of you if you had a podcast.
Yes.
And finally, once everybody left, you came clean that you actually have a podcast.
Well, and I didn't at the time.
Not yet.
It was in the development stage, and I did not want to publicly say, I got a podcast. I hadn't done a single episode at that point. I was working on 5 episodes.
Was the reason because there's so many guys who are like, "I have a podcast," and they burn out after 2 episodes?
That's part of it for sure. I knew the statistics that, most podcasts fall off after like 3 episodes. And I also just wanted to produce those first 5 episodes, launch those, and then get down the road a little bit, and then I could say, yeah, I've done a podcast, and well, it just so happens that I'm still going.
Awesome. Well, hey, you've got a bunch of listeners here. Your podcast is called Viking Legacy and Lore. And what's your tagline?
So at the end of every episode, I look at the camera and I say, "Be bold, be strong, and awaken the Viking in you." And the idea behind that is just, in a day and age where everybody's looking for identity, I find it encouraging that, the Norse, and in one particular way, the explorer element. I really enjoy reading about and learning about Leif Erikson. He was an explorer who actually ended up in North America 500 years before Columbus. And a strong Christian that had major influence in converting Greenland to Christianity and parts of Iceland, and so just that explorer nature, and and so anyway, it's So
I don't have a tagline. My friend Mike, who does the Expositors podcast, he has a great tagline, right? Like he says, "Everything we do here is to serve your personal study and your public proclamation of God's word." He says it at the end of every episode, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
I don't have a tagline. Maybe I should.
Well, you should work on it.
I know I need to. All right. So, Stephen, how does this connect to your Christian faith? Because it's kind of like being a Christian is a big part of your life.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can't separate, it's not compartmentalized. So, actually, I would say that early on in this process, I wrestled with the topic in general, because getting into the Viking Age and the history of the Vikings, all of a sudden you realize like this is entrenched in pagan belief, and so how am I going to navigate this, and then the community that's out there, they tend to gravitate towards that pagan belief system of the Old Norse ways, and then almost like a new neo-paganism with Old Norse mixed in, and so how can I honor Christ and not say things that are not biblical, but yet tell the story and the history. So like one of the hardest episodes to do is the Viking mythology episode, where you're talking about here's their beliefs, and so I just try to to emphasize the mythology element of it, making sure that like, look, this is myth and nobody really believes this stuff, or, those that do, it's still, we all consider it myth, and presenting it like that. And then I've learned and I've found ways to almost draw out some of the Christian themes and the Christ-centered themes out of the stories that are embedded in their stories. So now I can give examples of that too.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that too. And by the way, that neo-paganism thing, I think that's something that we should return to because, I lived in Hungary, you lived in Ukraine. I do know that in Hungary and I don't know about Ukraine, but Russia, I know for sure, there's been like a resurgence, over the last, let's say 20, 30 years of pagan beliefs and like people returning and saying Christianity was imposed upon us through politics and rulers. It was not our belief system. Our native belief system is this form of animism, for example. And so there's like a return to some of that. And I saw it in Hungary. I did hear a lot about Slavic mythology in Russia. And so I think that that's something worth returning to later on in the episode. So let's do that. And let me ask you this though, like, okay, is this kind of a bait and switch where you're like trying to draw this Viking community together, and then one of these days you're going to come out and be like, well, actually, now that I've got you, let me tell you about Jesus?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I've started to explore that a little bit more and more with some of the more recent episodes, and try to present those themes like a little bit more clearly, and then try to like, even there's one episode on the conversion of Scandinavia, and basically saying that this was actually for the betterment of the Viking world and for Scandinavia at large. And the reason why I wanted to take that route is two reasons. Well, one is true, but most scholars, just in reading and researching, listening to audiobooks, anytime it gets to the Christian part, they treat it like it's a negative. And so I wanted to take the maybe controversial approach and say, it's not negative. Here are the benefits. In fact, in the last episode, and we can talk about Harold Bluetooth a little bit, I just said, look, if he didn't convert to Christianity, you may not have a Denmark today, because there's a real good chance that the Holy Roman Empire was going to come and, turn it into Saxony. It would have been North Saxony and part of Germany.
They would have just conquered them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I listened to that episode actually last night. I was painting a bedroom and listened to a couple of your episodes. It's good.
It's like watching paint dry.
No. It was enthralling. Very good. So, so are you getting any pushback from the Viking community?
No, because one thing I do, I try to say, look, let's have a conversation, keep it cordial. Like, let's make connection here, community. We're not trying to like bash each other. People have written lengthy comments about their opinions, but I also don't present it in the, hey, if you don't believe this, you're wrong, or Christianity is superior. I acknowledge even the fact that a lot of it was politically motivated. Even Harold Bluetooth, there's a really strong chance it was politically motivated. And then for a lot of these Viking kings, or Norwegian kings, Vikings is a term that describes really what they did back then. But these Scandinavian kings, they did it to obtain connection and favor with Christian empires and trade routes and all this stuff. So there's a lot of different motivations why somebody would choose to convert and then make their whole entire nation convert.
Yeah, I mean, my only real knowledge, I've studied a little bit about the history of the conversion of Europe, through seminary and also just church history books. I find Germany's conversion really interesting, but of course I'm most familiar with the conversion of Hungary, and I could talk a little bit about that, but we're really here to talk about the conversion of the Vikings. Yeah. So let's start with this. Talk to us what is a Viking? When was the Viking Age?
Mm-hmm.
And then how did they become converted to
Yeah.
Christianity?
So most people would put the Viking Age starting in 793 when there was a major raid on a monastery, Lindisfarne, and this is on an island, and so like in Great Britain, and so the Danes come across and they raid and pillage, and it's recorded in the thing. Okay, so the thing is, Vikings and the Norwegians and Scandinavians, they didn't have a written history. And so most of what we know about them is written by Christians or, yeah, basically by Christians. And even a majority of their mythology was written by a Christian. So,
What was his name?
Snorri, yeah, sleepy guy.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sleepy.
Yep. Snorri. And so he wrote the prose edda, if I'm, yeah. So anyway, so 793, the raid on Lindisfarne, basically is kind of what they say kick-started the Viking Age. And then it didn't end until early 1000s. It's kind of the final battle where the Vikings were defeated at Stamford Bridge. And then really what you had is the fading out of the need for Vikings to go about raiding, because they had already settled in various places, like Normandy would have been settled by this point. They had found homes in England. They had started to, intermarry and mix. Denmark was united, and so and Christian, and so that just you don't go raid your neighbors if they're also Christians. So there were a lot of things that just kind of started to settle down and fizzle out, and then the Viking Age kind of came to an end. It doesn't mean that the Scandinavians came to an end, or that the Northmen and the Normandy and all that. They just continued on. And actually, there's evidence that some of these Norwegians took part in the Crusades.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's kind of like Ephesians 4, like let him who steals learn to work with his hands,
right.
you know? Oh, on the converse, maybe you'd say they got kind of like domesticated,
Yeah.
declawed.
Yeah. Yeah. And, again, technology was improving to create trade routes all over the world. The Vikings were great at trade networks. And so, I think part of what launched the Viking Age as well was they're stuck in the north. Life is not pleasant up there. And so you come down, you're trying to, make do. And so you can go raid a monastery, very little pushback. You can become very wealthy very quickly. And then that becomes a little bit addicting. You could go into England and you could threaten, or even into France, and you could threaten to burn a town, or you conquer, you defeat a king in battle, and they go, okay, look, we'll pay you 10,000 pounds of silver to go away. And then
Oh,
they say, okay, sure, let's go. We'll go away. And then your
that's like,
buddy catches wind of this, and then he's like, wait, for 10,000 pounds of silver, I can find a crew, and we'll go, threaten somebody too.
it's like extortion.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so it kind of, I think, reached its peak. But what ended up happening, and one of the aspects of Viking conversion, is they, in these lands like France and England, Ireland as well, they found more pleasant climate.
Mm.
And so typically you would go raid during the time between planting and harvesting.
Oh, and you got nothing else to
You got
do.
nothing else to do. You're waiting for your crops.
Idle hands, huh?
And so you go, and they're like, wait a second, this is actually kind of nice here. These beaches in France are not bad. Maybe we should just stay. And so they would winter there. And then I think they just were like, why would we go back there?
Yeah.
But then part of that is then they were exposed to Christians
Yeah.
all over Ireland, England, France.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about more, maybe the political side of it.
Okay. So in Norway and Denmark specifically, you had a lot of clans and tribes that were, they're all descendants of Germanic tribes ultimately. But they'd fight, but then they'd also work together and they'd trade, but then they'd raid each other and these things. And as Europe became increasingly more Christian, there was a guy named Charlemagne that he was very aggressive with his pursuit of spreading Christianity. And so he really started to creep towards the southern border of Denmark. And that put a lot of pressure on the Danes to find a way to unite. And so they did. They had one king that kind of united them and did a really good job of, and he's considered the first official king of Denmark and of the Vikings. But then he does a good job protecting the southern border. And then Harold Bluetooth comes along and kind of the same thing. He's responsible for uniting Denmark and even into parts of Norway. And he's credited with founding Denmark as we know it today as a nation by uniting these factions that would, fight each other, but came together in order to stand against not Charlemagne at that point. He's gone at this point, but to stand against, invasions from the south. However, he ends up converting to Christianity, and from there, now this is my opinion. He does a lot of it for political gain, and then also because there is unity within Christianity, and so if people buy into it, then he was like, "Yeah, we're going to have a unified people," and it worked very well. And so I always come back to, I don't know the genuineness of their faith, whether Harold Bluetooth genuinely believed or if it was completely political, or, if the common people truly believe. There's a lot of evidence that they tried to mix the cross and
syncretism.
Yep, the cross and then Thor's hammer, similar shapes. And so you kind of have, and there's even evidence on rune stones that they would have both images, Christ and Thor and all this, and trying to mix. So, we can't necessarily judge that element. We just kind of say, what's the evidence? What was the motivation? But in uniting Denmark, he really did a great job of saving Denmark and keeping their people, their identity as a nation.
Yeah, really interesting. Okay, let me ask you this. Sometimes people say that when you look at the conversion of the European nations, a lot of times it's kind of like going to a sausage factory, and it's when you see how sausage is made, maybe it's not as appealing as it used to be.
Yeah.
And so what do you think about, clearly, if you go to the Bible, right, Jesus is talking a lot about how every individual person needs to have a relationship with him in order to have salvation. And nobody can do it for you. You can't just get grandfathered into it. It doesn't matter if your mayor of your city is a Christian. You might even call yourself a Christian, but that doesn't necessarily make you a Christian. So what do you think, was it a net positive, net negative? How do we know if any of these people really believed? How do we make sense of this? And how do we see God in this? I mean, individuals converting? How... Yeah.
I think that's probably what it boils down to, is the individual who had genuine faith. And there were monks and missionaries that went to the north in order to proclaim the gospel. So the gospel was being preached. So whether the kings and the rulers were being converted for political reasons, it still opened up the opportunity for true teaching, discipleship, proclamation of the gospel. And so then you would have had genuine conversion. And you can see that in the churches that were erected and in the putting away of idols and temples and different outdoor worship settings. And some of it could have been forced. King Olaf of Norway, he definitely was ruthless in his destruction of any pagan places of worship. And so there was a lot of that heavy-handedness and pressure to convert, even so much as get baptized or, face the sword type of a thing.
Wow.
And so then you have maybe a forced conversion, but then if that person's exposed to the teaching of the gospel, by a monk that was sent from Francia or wherever, then, there's quite possibly genuine conversions. So it's like God works all things together for good. where the gospel's preached in pretense or in truth. There has to be net positive because the Lord is sovereign over all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard one good argument for this, basically even talking about our society today, saying like, if I believe that the teachings of Christianity are true and that they lead to the greatest human flourishing, then I want to live in a society that more reflects Christian ethics, morals, teachings, values, things like loving your enemies, praying for those who persecute you, forgiveness. I want to be living in a society that values human life, like more than a non-Christian society. And there's been a lot of talk about this lately, especially like from Richard Dawkins, a famous atheist, coming out and saying that he considers himself a cultural Christian, meaning that even if he won't go on record and say that he believes in God, he wants to live in a Christian world because he realizes that Christianity has influenced the world for good. And I think that is true. So I think in some ways, Christianity thrives in a sense when it's in a minority position. And yet, I think that you end up with a lot more Christians in a setting in which Christianity is given a bit of priority, I guess you would say, or it's giving, what's the word I'm looking for? It's given privilege, I guess, in a society where, okay, let's say like in a Christian Scandinavia, they're at least telling you that it's a good thing to be a Christian.
Yeah.
I would say I benefited from this in my own life, right? Like it wasn't necessarily that we went to church when I was growing up, sometimes, but not very often. But it was always considered like a positive thing.
Yeah.
Like it would be good if you did do that. Well, I mean, we're not going to do it, but it would be good if you did do it.
Sure.
If somebody did it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was thought of as a positive thing.
Yeah.
And it was interesting when I moved to Hungary, I realized that there was a whole generation who grew up in communism and it was not considered a positive thing. So when their grandkids or when their own children started going to Christian church, they tried to discourage them, right? Because in their opinion, that was not like a positive thing that you should do.
Yeah.
By any means, right? So I feel like that is a general thing that I agree with you. It comes down to person, but you're going to be more exposed to the gospel in a place where it's given priority or privilege.
Yeah.
But again, that doesn't save anybody. So we acknowledge that. Yeah. Okay. So let me talk to you about this. In one of your podcast episodes, your first one on the conversion of Christianity, where you kind of came out and said, okay, let's talk about this. One of the things you talked about is how actually built into some of the Scandinavian or Viking mythology were elements that are like interestingly similar to Christianity.
Yes.
Now, first of all, I want to hear about some of those. But secondly, I want to talk about this thing called the monomyth theory, and also known as the hero with 1,000 faces. This is something that C.S. Lewis talked about and Tolkien, and led to C.S. Lewis's conversion. So you go ahead.
And so, and that has been part of the journey also in writing some of the newer episodes. Well, I guess a majority of the episodes. Is this idea that we can emphasize and tell the monomyth through their language, through their story, and almost like Tolkien or C.S. Lewis in their writings, they just leave it hanging out there and let people come to their own conclusions and see those principles at play. And so any chance I get, I try to emphasize some of these connections and parallels is going so far as to, I did an episode on Ragnarok, which is the Viking belief, their mythology on the end of the world. And it does a good job of kind of introducing a lot of different characters, what they believe is going to happen in the end. But I basically went through, I'm not sure if it was 10, 15 points, but I gave a biblical like parallel for each of them. And so I didn't shy away from that. I didn't say, hey, here's what I believe. I just said, that is also in the Bible. that is also already written in scripture in advance of all of this. And so just trying to help people see that, oh, some of these stories, they actually may have some biblical roots to them, you know. So I guess I'm trying to think of maybe one of the example that shocked me as I was going through, and I can picture a monk from England traveling to the north and having a conversation and talking about the difference between Odin, the All-Father, right? And if you've seen Marvel movies, you get a taste of Norse mythology in the Thor movies.
I'm going to be honest, I've never seen a Marvel movie.
Okay, well then you just get to enjoy this.
Okay, I'm along for the ride.
But those that have, then they got that little hint of it. So Odin is considered the All-Father. He's the was there at the beginning of creation. And so a couple things there. So let's say, okay, a monk travels to the north and he's having a conversation with somebody that worships Odin, and they're talking, and he says, well, Odin created man and woman, him and his two brothers. There were three of these gods, and they're on the shore of, let's say, Norway. It doesn't say specifically, but they're on the shore, and along comes these two pieces of driftwood, ash wood and elm wood. And out of that ash and elm, they carve man and they carve woman. And then Odin breathes life into these wooden carvings, and there's the creation of man. Mm-hmm. And so you can imagine if you're a monk and you're hearing their stories, you're like, that sounds awfully familiar. Our God created man out of the dust, and there's a Trinity there as well, and breathed life into him in the same way. And so now all you got to do is just, almost in a sense, prove that, our God predates, your revelation, and then you should, you can make ground very easily that way. There's another one where Odin is depicted as sacrificing himself on a tree. So in Norse mythology, they have this famous tree. It's called Yggdrasil. And it's the tree that connects all 9 realms, and I'm not going to go into all that, but he hangs himself on the tree, not for 3 days, but for 9 days he hangs on this tree, and he sacrifices himself for himself. And so you can imagine, again, a monk having this conversation. Well, our God came down from heaven. He hung on a tree. He was sacrificed, but not for himself, for you. And how much more loving and personal is that? And the Norse gods, kind of like the Greek gods, the Roman gods, they're really kind of just as messed up as humans. I mean, really projections of ourselves, I guess, into the pantheon. But yeah, so I can just see and picture how a monk, if they're on their toes and they're ready, they could use that as a segue to tell the true gospel and the true story.
Yeah, looking for those kind of bridges, connection points, points of similarity. Okay, so are you familiar with the monomyth, the guy who wrote it, Joseph Campbell?
Yes. Yep.
Could you explain it for our
So,
listeners?
I mean, as much as I know is basically there's one story, mm-hmm. and every story that comes out of that is based on the original.
Transculturally, meaning in every culture that you visit in the world, you will find stories that have similar elements.
Right. So redemption, and even like just the 2 examples I gave.
Self-sacrifice, that's exactly a big one. Mm-hmm. If you watch Big Hero 6, what's it about, right? This guy sacrifices himself for the salvation of these other people. I mean, every good story that's worth listening to.
Yeah.
Like the French, right, had this whole thing where they would try to be avant-garde, and they would try to have stories that didn't contain some of those elements. And like they didn't have an ending where good conquers evil. They didn't have these things. And everybody hates those, right? There's like a couple people who like try to say that they like it just to be, contrarian.
Yeah.
But all the great stories that we love, they all have recurring elements.
Yeah.
That's the idea behind the monomyth.
Yeah. And as far as I understand, Tolkien would say that he didn't write Lord of the Rings to, proclaim the gospel, but it's like it's there.
Yeah.
Because that is the story.
There's a place in Oxford called Addison's Walk.
Mm.
It's part of Magdalen College, and it's actually a private property. It's hard to get into. A couple of years ago, it was when I graduated my undergrad, my bachelor's. We went there. We have some friends in Oxford, and so we visited, and we got into this place and walked this loop. It goes around a little lake. But that Addison's Walk is where C.S. Lewis tells the story of his own conversion, that he was hanging out with Tolkien and this other guy who everybody always forgets his name, including me. I have it written down somewhere. But the point is that they were walking around. It was like until like 11 o'clock, and they just kept walking around this loop at the lake. And, they were both, Tolkien had written a book called On Fairy Stories, which is where he kind of gives his theory of why it is that there are these stories that are recurring in all these cultures about supernatural things, for example. And he says, because there's something about us that resonates with that. There's something that desires for us to be able to transcend the limitations of this physical world. There's something that desires to communicate with spiritual beings, right, that are different than us and have abilities greater than us and from a different realm. And then C.S. Lewis says, yeah, your book and your concept, he's like, I so much resonate with it. And he goes, what's weird? He goes, it's almost like in the Christian story are all the elements of what people love in every other story, right? You have good conquering evil. You have life out of the jaws of defeat and death, victory out of the jaws of defeat, life out of death, love that never ends. And he just listed off, communication with divine beings, the hope of life after death. And he just goes on and starts like rattling off all these things that Christianity has in its story. He goes, that's like they took the greatest hits of all the other stories and just put them into one story. And Tolkien comes back and says, or maybe all those other stories are refractions and reflections of the true story of the world, which is in fact the story of Jesus. And C.S. Lewis said it was in that moment that he was converted. And he said that he came to realize that Christianity is what he called the true myth, of which every other story is only reflecting a portion of it, right? So when you hear this, you're like, there's a portion of that.
Yeah.
And you got that part, but what if you had all of it together? That would be the true story of the world.
Yeah.
And the true story is written on our hearts. And it almost says that in the Bible, that eternity is written on our hearts.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it just made, when you're talking about that, is the first time I really leaned into that in one of my episodes was on the episode about Norse trolls, and most popular episode so far. I don't know why, but most popular episode. So, but I basically start out by telling the story from a saga about, a guy that goes and he's searching out a troll, and they finds the troll, and they kind of have a little tussle, and then the way it goes is, in order to subdue this troll, this like rock monster, is to cut his hand, and then to apply the blood from his hand to this rock, and then that conquers the troll, and the troll kind of ends up into a heap of rocks again and is dormant. And so towards the end of the episode, I kind of lean into that like reminder of where we had come from in the episode, and I just talk about, it's the blood, it was the self-sacrifice, it was the blood applied, and somebody in the comments writes, "That's Jesus," and so I thought, all right, I didn't overtly say it, but hey, good on you if you saw that.
Laying out the trail of breadcrumbs, am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, that's good.
But that's the theme is, there's that self-sacrifice element, and it's the blood that conquers, and,
Man, yeah, it's cool. So the end of that story is that I was walking around this lake and my kids, I was with my kids, and I had read Surprised by Joy, that
Mm.
book where C.S. Lewis talks about his conversion, which I always say that book should have been called Surprised by Boredom. That is literally his worst book. But at the end, he talks about his conversion, which is cool. But I was walking around that lake with my kids and I started just like telling them the story and I just like couldn't stop crying. Like, I mean, it was just like so touching. And that was a thing that I had heard about this concept of the monomyth, the hero with 1,000 faces, is that because this story is written onto the heart or the soul of every human being, that's why when you watch movies, there are elements that make you cry. Why? You know it's made up.
Yeah.
You know that these people were paid to act in this movie, right? And you just paid like $3.99 to watch it on, standard definition or whatever. But yet you cry. And why do you cry? Well, because there's something in it that resonates with the deepest longings, loves, and desires of your soul. And so slightly shifting gears. We're not grinding the gears here. We're just shifting into a nearby gear. Okay. The other day we were at church together and we were doing this like Wednesday night thing. And instead of participating, you and I were standing outside talking, or maybe it was afterwards. Maybe that was better. We participated and then afterwards we were talking.
All right.
And then, I don't know, we got to talking about the Norse conversion.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I said, that's kind of like the book Peace Child.
Ah, yes. Oh, boy.
And you said, book Peace Child. I never heard of this book. I haven't heard of it. And I said, are you kidding me? So I went into the bookstore and I comped you a copy of Peace Child.
Yes.
Have you read it?
That's a tricky question. Have I read it? I have read it.
You've read some of it.
I read the cover. And I'm kidding.
I saw you read like halfway through.
I've made some progress. It's not the most engaging book in the world, and I'm waiting to get to the part where it's like, yes, here we go.
It gets better. But let me tell you this.
But it's setting it all up. I can tell.
He wrote a follow-up to it.
Yeah.
That's even less engaging.
Wow. So, I get where we're going.
Yeah.
And plus you spoiled it for me.
I really did.
But so I'm just making my way through the setup of these tribes in Indonesia, I believe, right?
It's Papua New Guinea.
Papua Guinea.
But tell our listeners, tell them how far you've gotten, and then maybe I'll tell them what happens next.
All right. Well, I'll bring you up to the spot, and then you can take it from there. So it basically starts with these tribes that their whole thing is like tricking people and betraying people. It's like that's their code of honor. Like, we did it. And so like it starts out with this guy and you're just like, oh, it's not going to end well for him. And so he meets these, this different tribe and they're like, oh, you got to come. We're buddies and we'd never betray you. And they play the long game.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy takes multiple trips until finally they're like, all right, tonight's the night. And they get him. And then it just goes back and forth and back and forth. Everybody's trying to kind of get their revenge and betray him this way and that way. And so I'm at the point where the Dutch are coming and starting to get involved. And so that's where I've pushed pause.
Yeah. So what happens in the book, it's actually it's a true story of missionaries who had gone there. And they thought if they just tell people the story of the gospel, that these people will be like, wow, that's a great story. And we believe it and it's true. So they tell them the story about Jesus. Here's the story of Jesus. And, he came, he lived a perfect life, sinless. And at the end of his life, one of his closest friends betrayed him for 30 pieces of silver, a relatively small amount of money, and hands him over to people who kill him. And they expect that people are going to be like, oh, wow, that's terrible. And he says, and then this guy, he dies a sacrificial death to redeem all of humanity, and everybody who believes in him is saved. And like they get hung up on this thing about Judas, the betrayer, where they're like, that guy Judas, that guy is awesome, the best. We want to be like that guy. He's the hero of the story. And the missionaries are like, no, 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 no. I think you guys misunderstood. And they're like, no, no, no. In our culture, we like to trick people and betray them. That's how you prove that you're smarter than them and you're like a real man. And they're like, oh, what do we do? Right. And so what their whole theory was that in every culture, that there is some connection point, some bridge, some belief that they already hold, that, or a practice they hold, that you can connect to and say, well, here's what Jesus did, and it will make sense to them. It'll resonate with them. So then they end up finding it. This is the part you haven't got to yet.
Right.
And the part they haven't got to, that's where the title comes from. It's kind of giving it away in the title, actually.
Yeah.
It might be in the back cover too. I haven't read the back cover, actually. I read the contents.
Yeah.
So then what they find is that they have this practice in their culture where to make peace between warring tribes, one tribe will give a child to the other tribe, and that tribe will raise it and adopt it, and they need to honor the other tribe by treating that child with dignity and respect. And so they were like, well, that's kind of similar to the gospel, right? So God gave his only son to his enemies in order to reconcile them to himself. And so they tell this story, and that actually happened. So that's the other thing that they discovered. Like, it wasn't just theoretical. Like, they had just recently done this. And there's a little girl. And so they tell the story, and they're like, oh, okay. And then the tribe converts, and they become Christians. So then he writes a follow-up book. His name's Don Richardson, missionary, longtime missionary. And his other book is called Eternity on Their Hearts, and he talks about tribes in Peru. But his whole point is to show that this is universal, right? There is a universal thing where there are these points of connection. So let's bring this all back around to the Vikings.
Yeah, well, that's the end game. That's the ultimate goal for doing a podcast like that. One, it's interesting history. I enjoy it. I get to learn a bunch about, maybe my heritage to a degree, but just the Viking world in general. But with the goal to bridge and make those connections so that this whole world out there that, that I don't know that they are exposed to the gospel. But they clearly have an interest in this subject, and they have a desire to believe in something, and even if it's the old ways, so to speak, but to try to bridge that gap, and then ultimately to say, the Vikings became Christians. Whether you like it or not, they became Christians, and maybe it'd be good for you to consider that too. And but to do it in a way that's helping them bridge those gaps and make those connections to the stories they already want to believe or just know, and then to bring out those redemptive elements.
Just historically, the Scandinavian countries have been some of the greatest missionary sending countries of the last 100 years.
Yeah, and so Harold Bluetooth, key figure, he's kind of the first major conversion for a king. So then from Denmark, Christianity goes to Norway. And then from Norway, it takes a little bit longer to catch on in Sweden. And then from Norway to Iceland, and from Iceland to Greenland. And if you look at the Scandinavian countries, all of their flags, you can recognize them very easily because they all have a cross on them.
And Finland kind of copied them. Well, Finland had a ton of Swedish influence.
Yes. Correct.
And Finland was one of the last countries in Europe to convert to Christianity. Happened like 1500. Yeah. Interesting stuff. So, okay. Let me tell you two interesting things about Hungary and their conversion. Right. And then let's talk about this kind of neo-paganism. One of them is that, when you talk about these things that are built into their culture, one of the things that I think is really interesting in Hungarian, etymologically, the word for God is Isten, which comes from Old Hungarian, which literally means Isting, which means the ancient truth,
Hmm.
which is interesting. I don't think there's anything like expressly Christ-centered in that. But it is an interesting thing to point out that as they converted to Christianity, the now Christian Hungarians said, we don't need to change the name of God. This name is actually quite appropriate. He is always the ancient truth. He always has been. We've just now discovered who he really is. Yeah. And I forgot the other one that I was going to tell you, but I'll remember it later.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so what do you think is behind this like resurgence of neo-paganism in Europe, and what do you think the response should be?
Well, I mean, it's not just in Europe; it's in
Okay.
America as well. So, I suspect that it, again, it's it's written on our hearts to in this. There's this longing to worship something, to find your identity, and so people will explore, but because of maybe what they know of Christianity, or maybe their exposure to Christians, or just looking at their own history and how their nation was converted by force, and they want to find and explore spirituality apart from anything that has to do with Christ or Christians. But the reality is, like, if you just give Christ an honest assessment, you'll find that, whoa, actually, I mean, it makes more sense than anything. So, but yeah, I think it's just motivated by just anything but Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know part of it is, I know this even like if you go to the French Revolution, like the whole removal of Christianity from every aspect of society, and like that attempt to do that at least. I think a lot of it was this thing or this narrative that people started to believe that Christianity was imposed upon us. Right. It's not who we are. It's a foreign faith that was imposed upon us. Now, of course, Christianity would say, no. Like in the beginning, there was God, and God created the earth. And it wasn't and in the beginning, Adam and Eve knew God and walked with God, and all people come from them. In other words, it isn't that like one religion is trying to kick out and dominate every other religion. Right. Rather, what we would say is that there was a one true religion, kind of like the Hungarian concept, the ancient truth. We went away from this, like it says in Romans chapter 1. It wasn't that we didn't believe in God. It's that we didn't like that God had authority over us. Yeah. And so we tried to wiggle our ways out of it. And in doing so, we made up our own gods. We started worshiping the creation rather than the creator. And then, so in other words, we moved from monotheism to polytheism to animism, which is the ultimate degradation, in other words, is what the Bible would say. And then God pursued us and has been calling us back to that original truth, or that, again, in Hungarian, the Isten, the ancient truth.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Agreed. Yeah. And so that's, I mean, to me, that's what I hope will come of this is me understanding more of where they're coming from. And then being able to bridge those gaps and say, look, you do desire this, and God is calling you back to the truth, and doing it in a way that also shows that you can still enjoy the Viking world, the Viking Age, and believe in Christ. It's not like you have to well, then I can't, pursue or know anything. I just have to, only read the Bible type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, what do you say to somebody who says that really Christianity killed the Viking Age?
Well, I would say there's a good argument for that. But killed the Viking Age is a little bit extreme in the sense that the Viking Age was going to fade out naturally anyway, just as the Vikings stopped moving around. They kind of there's land for sale in North France. Well, we'll take it. But then eventually things just kind of settle in, and people, just start trading. Plus, to trade was less dangerous than to raid as well, because you didn't fight against people's armies and things. But the Christianity definitely helped the Viking Age kind of come to its conclusion because, again, you're not going to fight your neighbor who's also a Christian. Now that did happen. I mean, it's still, I mean, even not just, that's not a Viking thing. It's even in England, the tribes would have fought each other and they would both be Christian and both think they're acting on God's behalf. But it just settled things down. And yeah, and then if you can make your money in ways other than fighting, then might as well.
Here's another interesting thing. When you read about the conversion of a lot of early nations that were converted, right? One of the recurring themes is also that there were what they call power encounters. So I know that there was one of these in regard to Harold Bluetooth, right? Where there was a power encounter, meaning that a Christian missionary came and they said, well, words are weak.
Yeah, sure.
Hold this thing, right?
Yeah,
it was like a burning.
Hot iron poker type of thing.
Yeah, well, it was similar in like Boniface in Germany, right? So he walked into town and there was this ancient oak tree, this giant tree, and he just like got an axe and cut that thing right to the ground. And he said, no, Christ is greater than all your gods. He tore down all the pagan temples and just like walked in and said, we're done. And watch this, your God's not going to touch me. Or in Ireland, he went in, right, Patrick in Ireland, and he had to show that Christ was more powerful than the Druids. And so actually the symbol of Christianity in Ireland is the cross on top of the circle. It's never the circle on top. If you look at it, it's always the cross, and it communicates Christ is more powerful than the Druids and more powerful than the pagan gods. And this was a common theme throughout a lot of the conversion of Europe, particularly when it wasn't politically motivated, right? Where it was like missionaries came in and a lot of times, to, I guess you could say, unscholarly people, a lot of times they're like, well, I want to see an encounter. I want to see a power encounter. Yeah. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it would be, okay, so if taking it from both sides, I believe that in the case of Harold Bluetooth, that the story is easily true in that, he comes in and they want to see this power encounter, and he holds the hot iron poker and he walks across the massive hall and everybody's watching and he lets go and he's not burned. And so, okay, wow, it's a miracle. And at that point, Harold Bluetooth had said that that's where he bows his head to Christ and accepts Christ. But I can also see it from the other side, like, come on, who wrote that? Christians wrote that story, And so to be fair, I would say, okay, fine. So the equally, like, yeah, if you think it's true, great. And if you think it's not true because Christians wrote it and they're biased, then okay, fine. But the point is, at the end of the day, he did convert to Christianity. Yeah. That we're not going to debate.
Right.
He created the Yelling Stone in Yelling, Denmark, that basically says, I'm Christian. I made all of Daneland Christian, and on one side of the stone is Christ with his arms outstretched.
Yeah, that is interesting. So, yeah, I mean, I think about like Paul, at the end of the book of Acts, gets bit by the snake. Everybody's like, that guy's going to die, and then he doesn't.
Yeah. So from our perspective, for sure, yeah, I don't have a problem believing. I don't have a problem believing that the miracles followed the preaching of the gospel at all. Zero problem. But I do try to put myself in their shoes and say, as a skeptic, how would I react to that? And I'd probably say, come on, really? And so you're going to have to find, if you're going to make that your argument for, hey, you can
it's
believe.
It's not a slam dunk.
Yeah.
Okay, but the other side of the coin is that the Vikings didn't have a written culture.
Right. Yes.
They didn't write stuff.
That's right. Yeah. And so you can actually, it is such a weird dichotomy, I guess maybe is the word, but just this, the scholars just cannot stand the Christian influence in Scandinavia. But then they base everything else on these source texts that were written by Christians. And it's like, you can just tell that they hate that they have to do that. But then many of them will make the argument, these are accurate.
Yeah.
These are, true to, and it's like, but Christians, those meanies, they ruined everything. They made the Vikings less murderers and less kidnappers and human traffickers, which they were really bad for that. But
Yeah,
so anyway, it's just silly to watch secular
sure.
scholars try to reconcile these two things.
That's funny. Okay, yeah, I remember what I was going to say. The other etymology thing from
Okay, yep.
Hungarian. This one actually has nothing to do with our topic. I mean, it only has to do with this fact that earlier I said, is this kind of like a bait and switch, which is a very, very pejorative way to frame it. So I apologize. It's more like we should really think of you as like, you're like Don Richardson going into Papua New Guinea, looking for that bridge to connect those who have Viking heritage or find the Viking world intriguing and trying to say to them, hey, you know that thing that you've been reading about? Let me tell you the rest of the story. Let me tell you the whole story. And maybe even let me tell you the part of the story like that made them, what made them great, right? There were certainly like raping and pillaging, not as great.
Not great, no.
No, but honor, right? Like strength. Maybe I could tell you the story about one who was most honorable or the strongest, right? Or who did these things. So I think that's a much better way to frame it. So I would consider you like Stephen Pomeroy, missionary to the modern Viking.
So the digital modern Viking.
Yeah, the digital modern Viking. Okay, but here's what I was going to tell you. Just this really is not that interesting, but I always love the word in Hungarian for a bait and switch. So we say like bait, meaning like draw 'em in, then switcheroo or something, right? But in Hungarian, they say zsákba macska, which means cat inside of a bag, which I think is the funniest picture. Hey, reach in this bag, and there's a cat inside there. Yeah, so you're not doing that to people.
Telling to reach in and
there's like angry cat that's gonna scratch you all up.
Yeah. Bait and switch, no, because even if I go down the road of being more and more overt with my, connections and proclamations, it's not like out of the blue, like, gotcha,
Right.
So, but as of right now, I'm trying to use wisdom and use every opportunity I can find to present the story and just let people, almost sense like, oh boy, there's another biblical themed story in my story.
Yeah.
Almost like
here I thought I was getting into something else, but all these roads keep taking me back to the Bible and back to Jesus.
But then I can say, well, I mean, I didn't say that. I just am telling the story. And then, if the conversation presents itself.
So how much more is there to tell the story of the Vikings? Are you going to continue this for a long time? What more do you have to talk about?
Well, how long I continue, that's a good question because it's a lot of work, but I'm glad that I've done it. We're at episode 22, I think. So, that's pretty significant as far as podcasts go. It's a lot of work, but it's also good practice because it's, something I do on a routine. I'm telling the story, so I feel like it's benefits me even in sermon preparation and being able to tell stories and just be engaging, because that's one thing about doing a podcast. You got to learn how to be engaging from the first second all the way through the end. And I'm just still learning. I mean, it could take 100 episodes to really, find your groove, but I enjoy the process of doing hard things, doing challenging things, doing things where I grow and learn. And so this gives me that opportunity. So it'll go as long as, as the Lord would have me do it. And we'll see how long it lasts.
All right. So if you guys want to connect more with Pastor Stephen, his main work is here at Whitefields Community Church, but his heart's passion for Vikings, Scandinavian,
the Viking
things,
Age,
Viking Age. Where can people find that? Give us a plug.
Okay, so I mean, you can, now that this is out there and it exists, you can find us on Spotify, Apple podcast, Viking Legacy and Lore. It's right there. It's easy to find. We do have a Facebook page, and we're on social media, so Instagram and TikTok, and which is, where you discovered me. I thought it was safe because I thought there are no Christians on TikTok.
I actually wasn't really using TikTok.
Right. It was your cousin.
My cousin.
Yeah.
But since then, actually, I started promoting this podcast, putting little clips on TikTok, and yeah.
So you can find us just about anywhere. It's everywhere. It's Viking Legacy and Lore, Viking Legacy and Lore at gmail.com. You can email all that. And so, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Yeah. And I want to say, if anybody's interested in more history about this, let's give them some resources. I'm going to give 4 resources.
Okay.
2 of them I've already mentioned. I'm going to mention the other 2 first, then I'll reiterate those. Maybe you have some that come to your mind as well.
Mm-hmm.
Number 1, one of my favorite books of all time that I would read like for fun. And it's also very informative. It's called From Jerusalem to Irian Jaya, a biographical history of world missions.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. Talks about things like this. Missionaries going to Germany, Boniface in Germany, talks about missionaries going to other places as well. Talks about Charlemagne and the Holy Roman Empire. It's number 2. Second resource, Church History in Plain Language by Bruce Shelley, a guy from Denver Seminary right here in town. And just it's in its like 5th or 6th edition. Just a really great book, and he does a good job talking about it. There's also some books by Mark Knoll that are great about church history. Turning Points with Mark Knoll is really good. Tony Lane, my professor and mentor, also wrote a great book on church history that I think is worth checking out. And he covers a lot of the same kind of like Turning Points things, like Christian history and thought and stuff like that. And then the other 2 books I already mentioned on Richardson, the first one called Peace Child, the second one called Eternity in Their Hearts. Okay, what resources do you recommend?
Well, so, I mean, I don't have any, I agree. Like, some of those books, fantastic books. But, as far as like general overview of Viking history from Ash and Elm is fantastic book. Neil Price wrote that. And then you can literally get the prose Edda and the poetic Edda. And these are 2 basically translated source materials that, talk about Norse mythology. So if you just want to read it, some of it's a little bit random, but you're going to get the highlights of Norse mythology. And so those 2, if you're just, you're like, give me more Vikings. Like, there you go. Norse mythology and a little bit of the history. But that Neil Price book is just a very good, give you the whole overview. And it's a fantastic book until the very end when he gives his opinion about Christian conversion of Scandinavia. So, but as long as you know and you're ready for that part of it, it's fine. It's a good.
All right. Well, we should have you on again soon.
Okay, we're going to talk about like another completely different random
We'll
topic.
find one. Okay. All right. Thanks. Thanks for watching this episode of Theology for the People. I'll be back with future episodes, though as we get into the fall, those episodes might be fewer and farther between. So stay tuned to the podcast. Make sure to subscribe, like, share. Those all help the podcast to grow and reach more people. But also keep an eye on your feed, because as episodes are less regular in the next upcoming season, that way you'll be notified when new ones come out. So thanks for watching and listening, and God bless you.